All right. Welcome back to the Built Different podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Grant Hagan, joined with Mr. Adam D. Good to see you, buddy.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming back in with us. We have two really fun guests with us here today, up on the 48th floor in downtown Dallas. I mean, Jeff, you really outdid yourself with having us come up here. I mean, the views, I feel like you could probably point to half the projects that you've been involved with up here.
It is kind of fun. You're able just to walk around and go, I did that job. I was involved with that one. Beck did that. We designed that. And it is really cool.
I mean, we're in the corner office suite up here, Paul. I'm sure you could probably point to half the jobs that either you knew someone on or you were a part of. I mean, you've been up here before though, right?
Yeah, I've been up here, but downtown-wise, I haven't built much, but I'm aware of what Beck, some of the history behind Beck.
Yeah.
Building a lot of these buildings in Dallas. So yeah, it's pretty impressive when you look out over the city.
And it's even a little bit of a rainy day here as I see some planes fly up, probably not even that much higher than us here. But this is going to be really fun. One, I just appreciate you guys making the time out of your guys' busy schedule. Jeff recently retired, so you're having all fun things of new hobbies and enjoying grandkids maybe with a little bit more time. And Paul, thanks for hopping out of your job to come and chat with us.
No worries.
It's going to be fun. So this season, we are all talking about the field. I was impressed. I think some of our best conversations, Adam, are before we hit record. And Jeff over here was like, Adam, listen to your episode. Feed the field, man. Is that what we're going to talk about? And I was like, wow, Jeff, I might have to just give you the host mic over here. I mean,
we need to start getting in the practice of recording some of these walk-in conversations before we actually go on air.
I was thinking about putting a little mic on us, but then at the same time, that you don't want to, see what you catch, and you're like, okay, I don't know if we should have hit record on that.
They didn't sign a disclosure for.
And Paul too. You said the same thing. You're like, hey, listen to it on the way in, and it was cool. It's fun that you guys obviously know the value of what I think helping educate more of the industry can bring, and obviously, Paul, your background of being out in the field, and Jeff, you from an operations standpoint. When I was thinking about who we could bring on for this season, I was like, man, there's no better people than you two. One, because Paul, I've really enjoyed being out on your jobs, how well they're run. Jeff, we have a whole history that we could even go into, which would be really fun, but we wouldn't have time for today. So one, I just want to say thank you guys. Thanks for making the time to come up here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Before we get into it, and Adam's over here feverishly with his questions ready to fire, but Jeff, give us a little lay of the land. How do you summarize your 40-plus year career in a little elevator pitch? But give us a little lay of the land. One-stop shop, been with Beck for 40-plus years, recently retired here a few months ago. But, give the listeners in a little bit of background of what you did.
So real quick, Jeff Forbes, Sioux City, Iowa, went to Iowa State University.
Go Cyclones.
Yes. From there, I ended up getting involved with construction. I looked at architecture. I ended up winning a full ride tuition to Iowa State because I won a drafting contest. And I thought, architecture. Talked to a lot of architects. I said, you will not make any money. And I said, okay, construction. And from there, one of my professors that I looked up to, Gerald Chase, said, if you ever get a chance, work for HCB contractors, which became Beck. And they get it. They're into innovations. They're into creativities. They know all about integrity. And I had that opportunity. So in 1982.
I was going to say, I knew you were going to start throwing some dates out here too.
I know. 1982, came down to Beck and started working on the 37-story building for AT&T just across the street. So like we started, it is kind of fun to point out this window. That's my first job. The second one was a Philip Johnson building, a 62-story building, and saying, okay, I was able to do that. So starting at the bottom, working my way up, I got to do everything. And, whether it was coordinating subs, on my way up to leading projects and being creative in how we did that. We merged with an architectural firm back in 1999, and with that, had the opportunity to build and design the very first integrated project for Beck. And since that time, I've just had a passion for building, for designing, and just really giving the owner his dream building.
In that kind of rise, and we'll come to you here in a second, Paul. Over the course of your career, kind of what, just quick example or list of the positions that you've held as you've moved up, right? You probably started as a field engineer or intern or however you started with Beck, but then
back in the 80s, Jeff.
Yeah,
Sorry,
back in '82, where'd you start?
It's kind of fun since neither of you two were alive then. Okay,
I was only 3 years after that. So
okay. So real quick, office engineer trainee, office engineer, project engineer, senior project engineer, project administrator, project manager, senior project manager, operations manager, and then finally regional manager.
I'm trying to count on my hand how many that is. That's like 10-ish or so.
And really, Adam, somewhere in there was a field engineer too.
Sure.
And helping with layout.
And every company's got their version of what those different titles are. But
Absolutely.
But you've seen the full gamut, right? You've gone from, boots dirty in the field, running jobs, to executive level leadership and managing the business as a whole. So
Absolutely.
that's an awesome path through that career.
I didn't know how you were going to put it into an elevator pitch, but that was pretty good.
That was good.
That was
great.
That was
41 years, real fast.
41 years. Mr. Krauss, give us a little background about you.
Okay, so obviously I have a slightly different accent to Jeff and everyone else here, so I'll go way back. I was actually born in California and moved to New Zealand when I was 2 years old, and I grew up there. I had an uncle in New Zealand who was a builder, and I just wanted to be like him. So from probably the age of 5, 6, I'd go out on school holidays and go help him, just banging nails into 2x4s, or I'd pick up nails off the floor or slab or whatever and take them home and just bang them into a tree or a fence. So I feel like I've always had building in me, wanted to always be a builder. I left school early and got a job with a commercial construction company in New Zealand. We built some, well, I'll say reasonably big buildings for New Zealand, but nothing compared to over here. And then I got into some home building. I did some renovation type work in New Zealand. And then one day me and my wife had decided that because I was born here, that we could come over here and try our hand and see what opportunities would be here. So we moved to Pennsylvania, and I had a bunch of different jobs there, from framing homes. I got on with a small GC there that ended up closing up, and I got another opportunity. And then after being in Pennsylvania for 9 years, I think it was, we decided we'd move to Texas. And I actually had, from Pennsylvania, a couple phone interviews, and Jeff was one of those. I kind of ask him every now and then if he remembers interviewing me on that. And I think you do, so it's worked out.
Sounds like it worked out.
Yeah, Beck flew me out here after a couple of the phone interviews, and I basically spent a day just shadowing some folks from the Fort Worth office, actually. And I was real excited. I was pretty fired up with what Beck was doing, and I'd never worked with some of the technology. Like I was real excited about like the iPad and things like that. So, that's now I'm just superintendent for Beck. Been here 8 years.
I was going to ask, the numbers all kind of roll together, right, Jeff? I mean, 41's a pretty easy number to remember, but yeah. So 8 years that you've been here in the Metroplex. What jobs that you've been a part of? I mean, obviously I got to work with you for quite a few seasons and different projects that you've been on, but give us a little lay of the different types of work that you've seen here.
So I started off at shops at Clearfork, looked after the landscape package on that, and then I went to TCU for about 3 or 4 phases out there, building some student housing. There was some large, like I think we built 6 or 7 buildings in the first phase that I was out there for that. Went from there to American Airlines, did a hospitality center for those guys, and that actually got stopped partway through because of COVID. And then after that, I went and did a pretty big renovation for DISD. And then I went to Atlanta to help out on a project out there, and now I'm at UTD building Athenaeum. So just finishing that up and looking to roll into phase 2.
Athenaeum too. One, I had to practice how many times to say it. 2, what is it for folks that don't know?
It's a museum.
Yeah, very nice, very high quality on a university campus of all places.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique building. It's definitely one of the more challenging ones. I'm actually just coming in to finish it up, so I wasn't there from the start because I was in Atlanta working on some stuff. But phase 2 is going to be similar, so I'm pretty excited about that.
What would you say
I think you're kind of downplaying this. This thing is amazing from a structural angle. I mean, typically you would come down and have columns around the perimeter. You have none of that. You only have a central core, and the entire level 2.
What is the primary
balanced.
structure? What is is it steel, concrete?
A mix of both.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's like V columns that are holding up. I mean, if you just imagine a shoebox with V columns holding it up from the center point pointing to the outside, that's what's basically holding it up. But when I downplay it, I guess I wasn't there from the start. So if I was working through the structure, I'd probably be
fair.
blowing my own trumpet a little bit more. But I wasn't involved in that.
Well, it sounds like you might get to do it again. You might have the opportunity to do it again with a phase 2 coming up.
Yeah, and I'm pretty lucky, I guess, because I'm going to have lessons learned from this one here. So, but yeah, I'm pretty excited to build something.
We're going to
pretty
come back
unique
to
like that.
lessons learned.
A great team out there too. It's fun. Beck did a ton of work on UTD's campus over the years, and that's kind of almost a little crown jewel for them, and obviously a lot of eyes and ears on that with design team and just kind of where it is on campus and for the students and stuff too. So, guys, that was great. I always love the intros because it's sometimes people are like, just get to the good stuff. It's like the good stuff is the 41 years,
Figuring
the
out who
8
you guys
years
are.
of pointing to projects down here. But
The other good stuff is we have something in common too. I also won a drafting competition when I was in high school. I grew up. My father was an architect, so kind of grew up, was going to go into design first, and I had the same realization. I was like, wait a minute, the money's over there, and I'm not an artist. So, but yeah, through high school, competed in drafting and some of that stuff. Board, manual, and CAD. So got a little flavor of both.
maybe that's the new podcast that we do is the changed road from design to construction.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone has a story along those lines of like,
Paul Higgins.
yeah, I mean, I could probably name a handful of folks that went that same route. Mine was like, I walked into the architecture school and was like, I can't do that. I can't draw that. And the teacher, I remember asking like, where did you buy that from? And she's like, oh, those are our students' work. And I'm like, ooh, I'm out.
I'm out. Yeah.
I
Not me.
appreciate you telling me that now. But anyway, well, so go for it.
Yeah, but a question, Paul, with your background, kind of where you grew up, how you got into construction. We have a lot of friends in the APAC area. We do a lot of business down there. Curious to just kind of get a general sense. I'm sure there's a long list, but like differences in building, differences in construction, whether it be steel is steel, concrete's concrete, but some of the building practices, maybe some of the hurdles, the blockers to building here versus back at home. Just kind of a quick digest on how different building in the States is versus in New Zealand.
Yeah, so it was pretty difficult when we first moved over here because, I'd say I've been a builder for 15 years or whatever, and people kind of looked at me funny, and I'd have to explain like the principles of building are the same. I don't build the roof first and then the foundations. Like it's still all the same.
Sure.
Where I grew up in Christchurch had a lot of earthquakes. I think 2011 had a pretty bad one. I think in 2015 there was another bad one. So there's a lot more, I guess, engineering around when you're building these buildings to withstand those the earthquakes and things like that. Mm-hmm. We don't have basements in New Zealand. I know there's no basements in Texas, but that was a big difference in Pennsylvania. But safety is a really big thing over there now. They were having a lot of accidents and things like that. So there's a lot of extra costs and stuff in building sites and especially residential.
Yeah, makes sense.
But for the most part, it's pretty similar.
Okay.
Nice.
Any difference in like the way that contracting methods or inspection processes? Is it more stringent in the States than it was back there?
I
Pretty
think
close
it
to
was
the same.
more stringent in New Zealand, to be honest with you.
Really.
But one big difference, and I would love to have this here, is that, like a lot of the guys working in the field, you could wear shorts.
Wow.
I would love to get back to that. Like I'd even say to people, like, I'm willing to forego any cut. If I have an accident, it's on me, not on you. Like, please let me wear shorts. I don't want to wear
That's
jeans.
amazing.
It's 105 degrees.
So that's like normal?
Yeah.
So, Paul, I got to just share this. I'm an avid cyclist. And so on Saturdays, I would drive around until I came to a Beck job and then just be looking in. And one of the superintendents told me, you can't come in. I go, why? I've got like a safety vest on. I've got safety glasses. I've got a hard hat, basically, bike helmet. I've got hard-soled shoes. He goes, yeah, but you don't have pants.
Look at them pants.
And so, yeah, I never was allowed to get on that side.
Yeah, that's rough right over here.
That's fascinating. You guys have probably seen all the golf stuff with PGA and Live, and it's interesting when you watch a Live tournament. They're all wearing shorts, and people are like, "Wait a second, That seems odd. I just think about like walking onto a construction site and seeing short, which I mean, it totally makes sense. I obviously from a safety standpoint, there's reasons probably why pants are preferred here in the States, but
Free the legs, that's what I say.
feed the field, free the legs, baby.
Exactly,
Come on.
yeah.
Well, we're going to steal that one. That's pretty good.
That's awesome.
Well, so this season we're all focusing on innovation at the field level. That's really what we're wanting to focus on. And Jeff, obviously, have seen a lot of innovation happen at a field level of your career. And Paul, you likewise, in being here and kind of mentioning what was attractive to you to come to Beck and some of the things that you've gotten to see. But I guess I'm curious, the question that we've started asking is like, what would you say your relationship with technology and or innovation is? Like, how would you define it today?
Well, as you know me, and like I said before, I was pretty fired up when I came to Beck. I was pretty excited about the technology. I would consider myself like an out-of-the-box thinker, or like to be trying to innovative. So I'm all for using as many tools as we can, as long as it's helpful to the job. I think if we can pre-plan using these tools prior to starting a project, rather than trying to introduce it during the project, that becomes an overload. And then I think that's when people get frustrated with the technology. But for sure, if you can bring it in early and show people what it's going to do and how it can be helpful, I think it's great.
Nice.
Where would you say that there have been some wins over the course of your career where a technology has been introduced and has really checked that box of helpful value for a project?
I would say the model, being able to model things prior to building. Again, if you can do that early on and get some of those clashes out of the way so that you can actually build, like that's a pretty big one. And I know back in the TCU days, we were meeting with Procore a little bit to talk about some of the model stuff and how we could maybe look at a real-time capture and then look at what's actually in the model and see that it's matching and things like that. So, but yeah, I think the model is pretty big.
Mr. Forbes, what's your relationship with technology?
Well, considering that
I was going to box you in and say, give it to me in 3
yeah.
words here, but
computer-assisted design was just rolling out in the 80s. So then fast forward, whether it's Revit or, some of the nuances that I really, really like. Navisworks, I think, really helped to identify a lot of problems. And, Revit, I'm going to say for the first 5 or 6 years, was not successful because architects and designers did not know how to go ahead and use Revit the right way. I think that contractors probably understood Revit better for trying to go ahead and coordinate and find the issues. But, real time, I think designers were just pulling stuff out of catalog to go ahead and put it in without any thought whatsoever of how does this relate to the other pieces that were in there. Grant, I think of a project back in 2010, 11.
oh boy.
This is one of your first
Oh
ones
boy.
at SMU.
How do we do this every time, Adam?
We keep interviewing your friends.
Yeah, that's true.
So
They know too much about you. We're going to do this with some Turner guys. I'm going to be on the hot seat.
the one
Go for
thing
it, Jeff.
about Grant is he asked the words, or always said the words why. Why can't we? Why don't we? Have you thought about this? Why, why? And one of those things was, why do we have 10,000 pounds of drawings? And we could eliminate that. And he made a return on investment type of thing. So listen, we can save $150,000 or whatever the number was by not having to reproduce these drawings and put that on a screen and have everyone with an iPad. And Grant, way to go.
Hey.
And what success is where you've got a 60-year-old superintendent for a mason who's in there using it the right way and saying, this is great. I can see this, I can see that. And really just pulling other superintendents into the equation and helping them. But SMU, I think, was the first time that we did that
Yeah.
and did it successfully.
We talked a little bit last time about just this intersection of like software and hardware. Kind of when that intersection happens, software obviously at that point was a Bluebeam, hardware at that point was an iPad, right?
Yeah.
Like if one of those two is excelling more than the other, it's probably not going to have the impact at the level it did. And if one of them is farther ahead or one of them is farther behind, you're probably just going to sit back and be like, we missed it. But that job obviously was unique. But I remember, saying, come over here. Like, let's go to the screen. Like, hey, maybe let's move away from some of these different pieces of paper. And I don't know, when you think about technology, it's more changing the relationship that you have with it more than actually using it. Because I think like now, think about that. That's 15 years ago. But think about what's 15 years in the future. Like back then, that was amazing. We're like, oh my gosh, this is an iPad. I can carry this out to the field. It's got everything on it.
And not only that, but you developed something called a hyperlink. Or on this job.
You
I know
invented
it was,
the hyperlink.
Yeah, no.
I'll take credit for that.
Yeah, but it was amazing how you could go ahead and just click there and then see the detail somewhere else.
I don't think I've met that Mason that you were talking about with the iPad. Most of the ones I'm working with still have paper. So,
and that's I think when we look at it too, it's like, okay, you obviously want everyone to follow or kind of come along that path, but at the same time too, if that is what works for them, it's like, all right, hey, I'm not gonna I think that's what that job taught me was like, hey, you can't force anything on anyone. You have to convince them that this is gonna meet them where they're at, and to do that, you got to put yourself in their shoes. And if you don't do that, hey, game over, right?
Well, I think when you're saying what is it going to look like in 15 years, like some of these longer in the tooth folks that are working on the job site will kind of cycle out, and there'll be a younger group coming through, and I think the iPad and the technology will be used a lot more than what it is today, because there's still some of these folks a little older than me, more seasoned, that still want to have the paper. But I think in 10, 15 years it's going to be.
Do you remember
iPads.
when the iPad came out and people were like, this is just a big iPhone. What are we going to do with this thing? Like, how am I going to fit this in my pocket? And now safety vests have iPad holders, right? Or what am I going to do? Like, why do I need apps on this? It's interesting that if you think about it too, like technology when released probably is a little bit farther ahead of the people that are actually adopting it. Oh, yeah. I mean, you guys have obviously seen and probably heard, these Apple Vision Pros, the new kind of augmented reality, virtual reality headset kind of thing. And there's a video that was buzzing around, this week of people on a job site walking with a hard hat on it too. And it's like, well, there's not really applications for it yet, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come out yet. I mean, are there tools that have surprised you that when they have come out, you're like, maybe at first I wasn't a believer in that. And now that I've time has, brought about that, I am a believer. Anything that come to mind?
We shared earlier the photogrammetry and being able to fly above and piece that together with civil plans to go and know immediately, just before you pour concrete, is it in the right spot? To me, that just blew me away.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good.
I would agree with that. And then laser scanning too is another one. I'm going like, man, that's pretty impressive to be able to scan something and make sure everything's where it needs to be. That's pretty cool.
But even beyond laser scan, you come into the existing building. Let's take, DISD that you came off. Laser scan, and then being able to populate all those data points into the model, modify it, know what you need to do, spit that back out so that it goes in the Trimble, and then lay it out. That's wow.
And what's interesting too about it though is I've seen folks that say like, oh, that's my solution. Like to your example, Jeff, photogrammetry, that's it. That's going to solve everything. But it's like when you take a step back, it's like that's one piece of the puzzle, and that one piece is going to help you be successful. And similar to laser scanning, right? Like if you would have just had the team come out and laser scan, it's like, oh, okay, what do I do with this? And it's interesting when you see teams and the correlation of success of those teams. It's like, well, it's the process that they're putting it into, not just the sole focus of it being, oh, that's the one thing that's going to solve it.
Yeah, I agree. But I think on the sites that I've been on, we're limited by the budget, right? So what was successful on one project may not be able to be taken to the next one because the client and the budget may dictate that we don't want to pay for that. And so that makes it a little hard because then you don't get used to using the same technology. Like I think if the teams and the technology that you choose to use on your site, if you can consistently use it, you're going to get better and better, and then you can offer feedback to those folks who are developing that to help make it better. And then I think you'd absolutely be able to use it to its fullest potential on your job sites.
Yeah, man, queued it up right there. So
up.
as a superintendent, we talk about budget. It's not necessarily your bailiwick on a project. It's not your wheelhouse right there. But as a superintendent, if you win on a project, win in figuratively, if you're successful on a project with some technology that you've really found a lot of value in, and then obviously you move to your next project. If that budget or that tech stack on that project hasn't been set up with that same tool, what are your thoughts and how do you feel empowered to raise your hand and say, hey, I need that again? Like, is that something, that you've done in the past? Is that something that you will do in the future? Or do you just accept the fact that, hey, we don't get that tool on this next job?
No, I think Jeff and Grant both know me pretty well. I like to speak my mind. So I try to get what I think is going to help us and the team be successful in the project. But sometimes your hands are just tied, and unfortunately you can't afford some of these tools. But I do try to stand up for what I think is going to make the project successful.
The interesting thing is, whether it's a backhoe, whether it's scissors lift, it's the right piece of equipment at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as leaders, we need to listen to what the right tools are. Now, within reason, because sometimes you could spend $1 million on technology
Easily.
if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the right piece? And like on the DISG job, they're not going to pay for technology.
Yeah.
And so we have to be smart about what we do and how we do it.
But that was still even a job that you guys did do it. And this is why I wanted to bring the two of you on, because that's a really good example of, hey, that may not be something that the owner goes and pays for, but it is something that we, as the Beck team at that time, said, like, hey, we're putting our foot down. We are going to use that. That's going to help us as our team coordinating, scheduling, doing logistics of, like, making this job. So, like, talk about that dynamic a little bit too, where you're saying, hey, fees are crunched, budget's tight. Jeff, I gotta have this, and what it is from your perspective too. Like, how do you handle it when an owner says, hey, I don't quite get it, but we know that we need it?
Okay.
It's kind of a softball question there. I get it.
Sure. With technology, sometime I mentioned Navisworks earlier, but anytime that you've got coordination, then you can really work with your subcontractors also. And it doesn't need to be borne 100% by Beck. It can be a shared type of technology cost, which is one thing that's pretty smart to do. Outside of that, like when we flew drones to make sure that we could show the owner just the level of completeness, then we were able to take care of costs that way. So you have to be strategic. Words matter, and you don't call it technology, but it's more a verification and audit of completeness of the construction, and then it'll get reimbursed.
In that evaluation process, right? I think we throw around the acronym ROI way too often. It's a household one at this point. But when you're evaluating, to Grant's point, whether we just decide to do it, right, eat into a little bit of our below the line what we're going to take home at the end of the day, do you weigh that against the efficiencies that are going to be gained in the field and the quality of life of the project team, the potentially some checklist items that they don't have to necessarily do, quote unquote, the old way? Like, how much do you look at kind of the soft side of that ROI versus just, are we going to get this cost reimbursed?
I think we do both. So, I think, again, back when you first started, Grant, and Grant was really smart. He goes, I can save the company 150, 100, whatever it was, on drawings. That's a great way to begin. Mm-hmm. That boom hits you because it's not reimbursable.
Right.
So that's savings. On the other side, as far as technology, I love to hear the superintendent say, this is what we need, because again, it's a piece of equipment that's critical to do what you need to do. And then at that point, then you sit down and go, okay, so we know we're going to mark this down. We know that we're not going to make money in this area. What do we do now?
And I'm curious, like, Paul, what are those categories in your mind when Jeff is kind of saying, hey, like, we know we need to have this. Obviously, like, I'm just going to toss a couple, like safety, scheduling, logistics. Like, are there categories of things that you were like, hey, I know that we need tool agnostic. We just need something to help support that. Like, what are those key categories for you that when you think about technology, it's like, hey, that's for sure going to help?
I think it varies from job. So like the DISD job was partly a remodel. It ended up being a total of like 375,000 square feet, but like 175,000 was a remodel. So obviously scanning that and throwing that into the model and everything was pretty important, because otherwise we would have just been, there would have been clashes all over the place, and it wouldn't have worked, and it would have dragged the project out a lot longer, and we probably would have lost money on it. So for something like that, that was probably a no-brainer to do something like that. I like to use some kind of scheduling tool, whether that's TouchPlan or Hoyle or something like that. So that, for me, that's a must-have on the job. Obviously, Procore is something that we have. We fly drones on pretty much all of our projects. I don't know that we use that to the fullest. We could probably use that a little bit better. But there are some of the ones that are must-haves for me.
One other must-have that I love what you did at DISD is the QR codes, to make sure that as someone was getting ready to jump on a piece of equipment, that you knew they were trained. They would have to go ahead and scan the QR code, and it would say when the training took place, who they were, and wow, that was a great deal.
Yeah, and we could check that it was inspected daily. It was a really good tool, and we just used Procore for that and utilized the QR code. So
I think to bucket those a little bit, what I heard you say is like documentation, whether that's scanning, drones, photos, let's just call that one bucket. Safety, another bucket, right?
Yep.
And then maybe just like scheduling as a third bucket. Like technologies that support one of those buckets are kind of the non-negotiables at this point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I'm curious, a question that I don't think I've asked either of you guys this, but has come up recently. Like, how do you hear about technology? Like, what are your outlets? What are your mediums? Who introduces it to you? Like, what are the ways that you hear about things that perk your ear in one of those three categories, or just like kind of raise an eyebrow of like, oh, maybe we should think about that?
For me, I look at like Instagram or Facebook. I get updated emails from various sites talking about different technology. And then I just I use the internet a little bit to see what other people are doing and how we could maybe improve our processes, or what I just take a little bit of something that someone's doing and maybe I can tweak that and improve it.
Okay, so the question we were asking was, how do you hear about technology? Paul, you had kind of alluded to some different ways. Jeff, you were, I think, in the middle of explaining. How do you hear about it?
I hear about it from our people, and finding out how our people are, where some of the obstacles are, what would make their work lives better. And it's amazing what you'll find is they'll go, I heard from a friend that works over at wherever, and they're exploring this, and I'd like to go further. Well, that's not enough to go ahead and spend a lot of money on. Let's figure out, dig into it, and maybe we do something on a one-off project. And wow, it's amazing what this thing does. I am blessed to be involved with AGC on a national basis, to be involved with Texo here in Dallas. And so I get to hear an awful lot about technology. One thing I did want to bring up, which I think is key, is there's a national effort within the project innovation and delivery to come up with a white paper that would speak to technology for small and medium-sized contractors. I think that's really key. I don't think that medium and small-sized companies need to spend all their money on new technology, but they need to do it smartly. Yeah. And I think this white paper is going to be helpful.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's definitely a different buying process for some of the smaller mid-sized contractors than there are for the the big enterprise dogs that are out there. But yeah, that sounds amazing and something I think that we should get our hands on.
Do you think at that national level, like where would you say you're gaining the most insight? Is it from the boots on the ground? Like one thing you did great was going out to jobs so often and taking people to lunch. How are you doing? What's been, eating your lunch, no pun intended, but like what are the things, which ways do you feel the most effective in? Is it kind of a combination of both of those at a national level? Like, hey, my ears are out there for everything, and then personalizing it down at a job site level?
It's both.
Yeah.
Asking and then looking for information that I can dig into. Kind of what Paul was saying is once I hear about a program or a feature, just being able to get on the internet and investigate it further. Finding people, hey, up there in St. Louis, are you using, oh, you are, so tell me more. Or up in Milwaukee, you're up there where Milwaukee Tool is, and this kind of ties into Milwaukee Tool. What are you guys using this? And I think that's the key thing, is being able to talk to peers and then finding out what's really going on.
How much do you weigh the value of the conversation with a peer who's referring you to something versus getting presented or getting what's the right word?
The broad.
Or having a technology company come to you and say, hey, we got this next great thing.
I hate to say this, I do not want to hear from a technology company.
Okay.
I don't.
That's perfect.
I don't.
Turn up the heat, Jeff. Come on.
Yeah. Tell us.
Turn it up.
Tell us.
No, but just think about it. I mean, they're selling cars, and I don't want to buy cars. I want our people to be able to do the best they can, and I'm not technologically superior.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I don't understand technology as well as you two, the Adams and the Grants. You guys understand technology. I'm not all that good at that. But I am good at listening to what our people need and what they want.
So when a tech company comes and presents to you all the whiz bang and all the wonderful stuff and all that, like, to a certain extent, you're not as adept in understanding the value of those things right away. So you're looking for the value statement first from a peer that says, hey, we went and got this thing, and this was the benefit and we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep buying it. We're going to keep implementing it for our people.
That would be helpful. That would be helpful.
That's the preferred route. Yeah.
Sounds like the tech guys are the modern day vacuum cleaner sales people.
Wow, the hot takes here are just amazing.
Got a rainbow for you.
Hey, vacuum cleaners are still around, Paul. We still use them today. They look like robots now.
Yeah,
and
they're on themselves.
I don't intend that to go down that route, but
well, they're technically driven too.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I'm curious. Maybe a question back to you though, Paul, is like, there are a wide spectrum of superintendents who love technology. Like, even just the question at the get-go, your relationship with it, open, I would say, is how you would summarize what you said. What about your peers here, whether at the company or close adjacent companies? Like, how do you elevate them around you to see the things that you're seeing, or are they coming to you and asking like, hey, like, man, this is just not working, and then you provide that opportunity? Like, tell me about interactions of technologies with peers. Like, and how do those conversations happen too? Because to Jeff's point, like, Jeff's going out asking these questions, how can this better help you? You're obviously surrounded by folks that have a broad spectrum of like, I don't want to touch it, to like, dude, I just had an amazing opportunity gained with this last tool that I use. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think on some of the teams I've been on, so if I go back to TCU, when I worked there, I had Justin Trucker-Miller and Jordan Christensen. They were big on technology, and they would often come to me and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or we should implement this. And we would bounce between the three of us different ideas, and what if it could do this, and what if it could do that? And so from that point, that was really good. That was my peers coming to me with ideas. On my more recent projects, I feel like I'm kind of leading that a little bit, like, hey, we need to implement this on the job. We need to use this, and this is why it's going to make your job easier. Now, some of them grasp that, and some of them don't. Some of them struggle a little bit, and there's a little bit of coaching involved there. But yeah, I'd say for right now, probably more trying to lead it, like come on guys, let's use this. It's going to help.
Yeah. Even outside of a superintendent level, you're saying like any role on a project team.
Yeah, for right now, that's what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Do you think it's because it's seen as a like distraction, or hey, I can't quite like connect the dots? Like in those cases, because I'm not to stereotype, but I feel like the superintendent has traditionally been the one that gets marketed to, meaning like from the project team to you saying, hey, we should use this. In this case that you're saying, like you're the one marketing it back to them. Why is that?
Well, to Jeff's point before, like I don't know that it's any good going to Jeff to say, hey, we got this really good tool, because Jeff's not on the job site every day to understand fully what that tool's going to do for him. So I really think the vacuum cleaner salesman should go to the end user, which is going to be the superintendent, right? So like if you guys were coming out to tell us how your tools can work, and it goes back to what I said before, at the right time in a project, right? Like midway through, like the superintendent's going to be like, no, I need you to bugger off. I don't need you here right now. I got to finish the job.
Bugger off? Is that a New Zealand phrase?
Yes, sorry.
You ever
Free
heard
the
that?
legs and bugger off.
That's what I was writing down here.
But yeah, if it's the right time and you guys were coming to say, hey, we got all these tools, then you know, for me on my jobs, I guess I would take that in and then run it through my project management team and say, hey, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah.
And then bring some of the more senior superintendents in to be like, hey, you guys like this? I think this is going to work, and this is how we could utilize it. So that's kind of how I see that playing out.
Okay, so one thing we haven't talked about, and Jeff, you got to see really this play out in your career from not being anything to having a full team. Like, let's talk about like an innovation team or a virtual design and construction team or a IT. Like, let's just talk about a corporate overhead team. Call it whatever title you want, innovation director, virtual design director. Like, talk about how your relationships with those teams has played out into technology being implemented out in the field. Because oftentimes, I think I would call it sales process. It's like, go talk to those guys. Those guys are going to go talk to you guys. You guys are going to go then talk back to them and say, hey, this is like, but that wasn't around 40 years ago. I'd argue maybe 20 years, 15 years ago. Sorry, Jeff. But like, how has that changed how technology is implemented on a job? Because there's a lot of talk of, grassroots implementation, there's top-down implementation. I think that innovation team almost kind of sits in between there, that they're like, all right, I got to go get the buy-in of the folks above, and I obviously got to go get the buy-in of the folks out in the field. Innovation teams, helpful, hurtful, too early to tell? Like, what's your guys' take? Because you've both interacted with them in different ways. Does that make sense?
Very helpful. I think it begins, Adam, and you touched on this earlier, it begins with the presentation, the interview, and what you can do to make the owner's life better.
Yeah.
So that he feels that we understand. It could be with the model. It could be with scheduling, 4D. It could be with safety and how we're doing things at a high level. But it begins very early, Grant, and then from there, you will have dollars in your estimate, in your budgets for that, and it makes it a lot easier.
And are you saying that the innovation team kind of takes on that process that makes it helpful? Meaning like
Pieces,
of
not
it.
the whole thing, but pieces. The job site team will also have their own, and they're well versed in certain areas. But if you've got a really good quality coordination team, it makes sense to have them get involved and do the coordination, or the same way with schedule. If you've got someone that can deal with P6 faster than our project team, it's good to get that person involved also.
So what I hear you saying is like, hey, one of the most helpful ways that innovation team called operational technology, it's got so many titles, you think is the most helpful is at that project pursuit level to help communicate that story to owners to...
Initially, and you set the baseline, you set the fundamentals, you set the expectations that the owner can expect. And then you have to deliver, which sometimes you over-deliver in your zest to win the job, but now you got to make sure that you have that money set aside for it.
How do you weigh the ways that you hear about tech, right? We talked about your AGC, peers out in the world in the industry. You have your job site staff, and then you have your innovation VDC, whatever it's called here at Beck.
OpTech team.
OpTech team. You have three sort of inputs. How do you if you had to force rank those three to say this is the one that carries the most weight versus this is the one that maybe I need to do a little more digging or come back another day?
I feel that the virtual design team is probably up at the top of that pyramid.
Your internal team.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they're pretty sophisticated. They know what's coming out. They've asked a lot of questions. You're trying to have consistency across the project so that if you go from one to another, the technology is reasonably the same.
Mm-hmm.
So if every project is 100% different, that's a problem. But
Okay.
if there's a consistency and you can be innovative, I feel that that team understands the process better.
So they'd be number one. Who's number
They would
two?
be. Our people.
So your job site, who's
Absolutely.
asking for it, and then
Absolutely.
then your industry friends.
Yep.
Got it.
Would you say the same, Paul?
No, the field's most important.
Feed
sure.
the field.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting though, so like, tell me about your relationship with like kind of like the OpTech VDC team, because I mean that was the role that I met you in, right? And I was coming out there being like, Paul, what do you think of this thing? Like it's an interesting dynamic because again, 10 years ago, those roles didn't exist, those teams didn't exist, and now it can be helpful because it's like, oh yeah, you are coming in at the right time or at the right part of the job, but it can also be overwhelming where it's like, dude, we're blowing and going here. Like we're topping out next week and you're wanting to do something that, we didn't. So like, tell me about your relationship with those types of teams. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it like still to be determined?
I think it's good. I think I agree with Jeff. Like it's helpful, but I don't know that we fully utilize it. Like when we were asking before about like how we hear about the new technology coming out, I feel like they are probably closer to it than what I would be to understand what's coming out or what is already out and what we could utilize. I think internally here at Beck, I think we should do like lessons learned at the end of projects or before we're starting a project, so we could say what worked really well, what do we need to implement on this job, because this is a really tough job. So, and they should be trying to help us navigate what that looks like as far as what technology we're going to use and how we can improve the process for everybody, for them to be able to get the job set up early on for us, and then when we're in the field, everyone understanding how to use the technology.
Yeah. Question that comes to mind too, what would you want to tell those teams? Like what's something that because a lot of the folks that listen to this are at that technology manager, VDC, OpTech innovation role. Like you coming from the field, what would you want to tell them? You coming from ops, what would you want to tell them about, I don't know, an encouragement, maybe a challenge, maybe like something that you've seen that that you would think that would be helpful? I see you smiling over there.
No, I think about Adam, and I think about his previous podcast, Feed the Field. I think it gets down to give the superintendent what he wants when he wants it. And if the field is looking for the right kind of equipment to do that, whether it's a laser scan or whatever, I think that is so important because it saves time in the field. And that's where 85% of the cost, 90% of the hours, the man hours, are taking place. And if we can affect that, it will affect that project very positively.
So you would tell them, hey, if you haven't been out to the field,
Go.
If you haven't, go
Get
talk
there.
to a superintendent, go, take them to lunch, walk the job with them. Paul, what would you say?
Yeah, the same. Like I know when you were here with us, you would do that from time to time, come out and we'd just trying to kind of chat and get excited about different things that were coming out. But I would suggest, definitely talking to your field team, seeing what they need, how you can help them out, and how you can maybe coach them into using some of the technology that we have. Yeah.
So what you didn't know, that was a setup question. Why doesn't that happen?
I
Like
think
what?
it happens. Well, okay, so
Got a bunch of prickly superintendents out there that don't want to hear from them. No, I'm just,
so it's very interesting. So Bryce Morrill, who used to head up IT, and now he's our chief corporate officer. He asked, I'd like to go out into the field for over a year to really understand what's going on. And I think it really paid dividends to have him go out there. And what he was dealing with was the VDG, or that piece, but also all of IT. And so he came back better prepared, willing to look at things differently, and is just really, I think, impacted Beck positively.
Why don't you think it happens, Paul?
I think
At that OpTech or corporate level, or OpTech, VB, whatever you want to call it.
Well, from my point of view, is I think the fields are stretched a little thin, and then when you finish a job, you're kind of already have planned your next job, and you don't really have time. I don't know why, on the other side, the technology groups don't come to the field. I feel like maybe they're the same. They're not working on one job, right? They're probably working on several jobs. So they're probably just head down, working really hard on what they're working on, and we don't make time. I won't say they don't have the time. We need to make time.
Do you feel like a mantra like that? I mean, Adam, I'm not going to steal it from you, but like, do you feel like a motto, whatever you want to call it, like, is helpful as a reminder? Like, I mean, all the companies have core values, right? It's like, okay, yep, the 4 that Beck had, but like the mantra or the motto, in a sense, like, that's what you kind of got to be reminded of, right? That's the thing that, culture leaks. If it's not like plugged up, if it's not well taken care of, it's gonna leak and change over time. Like, are those helpful mantras that you feel like those teams could put a little sticky on their desk of like, does this feed the field? Does this help my superintendent? Like, I mean, 'cause again, a lot of the listeners that are on here, hopefully, some of the takeaways they would hear from even just this conversation is like, hey, when's the last time you've been out to the field? When's the last time you put your boots on and like walked a job and like sat across from a superintendent at their desk and said, hey, like, what's your pain points right now? Like, do you feel like models like that are helpful, or are they kind of just like, because core values are huge, right? I mean, you talk about them in interviews, you talk about them at new hire orientation, all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, what's your take on just like a saying?
I think that would be good. I mean, I think that needs to be the way of thinking, right? I think some of these tech folks maybe assume what the field needs rather than asking what they need. And I think that's where the prickly superintendents probably get frustrated, right? Because they just get told, hey, you could use this, it's going to help you. As opposed to like asking them like, hey, where are you struggling at? How can I help you? Like, tell me what went wrong on this project, and maybe I can offer you some solutions.
I get to say this because I did the job, but the best way to get a superintendent to adopt something new is make it seem like it was their idea. Go in and, hey, have you seen this thing lately? Oh, yeah. And you say, oh, we got to get that on the job. Sure as hell we do.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yep.
Pricklies, I like that too.
We've said a couple things I want to come back to. Lessons learned has been one of them. We'll get to that next. Paul, probably primarily from your point of view right now, where are some of the biggest holes in the field, or some of those biggest pain points that you're experiencing kind of job in, job out, that the tech industry, the innovations folks out there, the people way smarter than me, smarter than us, what could they be looking at to improve? What does the field need now or soon?
I think we need to have those conversations with the tech and understand what's out there and how it's going to help us. Like, I don't know that all the folks in the field truly understand what's actually out there. For me, like, I try to ask our trade partners too, like what they're using, or I'll look on their iPads when they're out in the field and stuff like that, and I'll be like, man, that's a cool. Like we're working with Dynaten right now, and they have some really cool stuff of how they can look at everything they're installing in the building, and so that kind of perks up my ears a little bit. I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? And maybe we could use that for the whole building, sort of thing. So, but yeah, I think just getting out and talking to the field.
Is there a traditional kind of aspect of the project or the building process, right? We talk about safety and scheduling, and even all the way back to like pre-construction estimating. Are there any of those kind of lanes, if you will, or those categories that you haven't seen much innovation in lately? I mean, we threw out P6 a minute ago, but you threw out some newer tools that you're using as part of your planning process. What else in kind of the building process just feels kind of stale?
I can't really think of any right now, just because I went to Atlanta for a real fast-paced job, and before that I was kind of sitting idle a little bit for a couple months, and then I've just come into this one right at the tail end. So, yeah, I can't really think of anything that's.
What about the 40-year over there? Sorry, Jeff. I got 4 more credits of those, so I'm down 2 more. So I mean, what do you think? I mean, you've seen stuff change over that amount of time. Which ones do you feel like, of the construction life cycle, which ones have you been like, whoa, that really has been infused with technology and innovation, and one that it's like, wow, how is it still there?
Currently, I feel the biggest area that we suffer in is incomplete documents. Because every time we have an incomplete detail, that corresponding subcontractor has got to stop, wind up his tools, move to another area. I'd say that the biggest loss of profit to our subcontractors is the level of completeness of documents. I feel that if we
Specifically the drawings.
The drawings.
Yes.
Absolutely. I feel that if we can get a handhold on that, and we have made incredible strides toward that, that will benefit the field about as much as anything, in my opinion.
That's an interesting. I agree with you. It's an interesting call out, and I'm not going to use one of Grant's credits here, but we talked initially about your background. Look interesting in drafting and design. My background, drafting and design. He didn't even get the foot in the door just yet, but having a father who grew up, his career was all vellum, right? Mayline, drawing. He was also a builder. The architectural practice back then, I think, were more of that, like master builder. Would you say that the completeness of those documents, and for everybody, we're speaking specifically of the drawings, would you say that those details have gotten worse over time?
Because of technology?
Because of technology?
It can be. I mean,
Okay.
if you're taking, what is happening is owners are pinching down fees, which on an architectural or design side are man hours. So when you have less man hours, you rely then on technology to help you, and in some cases that technology proves to be incomplete. Case in point, you might have 17 different type of joint sealants, and you should have only had 2. Okay? And that happens all the time. Or you have multiple details that are not coordinated. I remember on my very first integrated project, meaning we designed it and we built it, we had the architect who designed the skin out on the job site. And he also was involved with the layout of the interiors. We get ready to lay out partitions, and the drywall subcontractor said, I can't do this. This dimension string is wrong. So what do? You ask the guy that designed it to go out there, and he goes, well, wait a second, I need to just look at CAD. No, you're not going to look at CAD. You're going to look, and this is before the advent of iPads, it was drawings. You're going to go out in the field and you're going to lay it out with the drywall guy.
Yeah.
He comes back in 2 hours later and goes, I can't do it. It's incomplete. I didn't include enough information. Guess what? That next building, he's going to have a dimension string that people can rely on. And it's just interesting that sometimes technology will help and sometimes it will like push us back. The very first set of drawings, 41 years ago, I'll use it.
Yeah, come on.
Was interesting. It was about, I'm going to say 1.5 inches thick, maybe 2 inches thick, of drawings that were in different colors. Annotations in black, MEP in red and green and blue, and each one was layered. It was fantastic. And we ended up doing the job with something like that. Again, a 37-story building.
That was the hot tech back then was the light table, right?
Yeah.
Overlaying those drawings and looking for clashes.
Do you think that, Paul, that because that worked back in the day, that's maybe made some of the pricklies, I think we're going to coin that here. Do you think that's made some of the pricklies less excited to try new things? It's like, is it almost a sad or frustration of like, it just wasn't the way it used to, and I'm never going to go back to that, and I'm always going to have to like fight this uphill battle? Like, do you feel like that's been a kind of an anchor in a way for pricklies to get on board?
Yeah, I think so. I think the level of detail in drawings, from my point of view, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, were a lot better than what they are today. But I'll agree with Jeff. Like, I think our owners, our clients, are dictating like how much time we can spend on the details on these drawings. And again, it goes into our what tech we can use and what we can't. And they want us to submit a price and then start tomorrow. And we don't have much time for planning. And then it's like, we need 24 months. Well, no, you got 20 months to do it, sort of thing. So I think our clients are dictating to our field or to us a lot of what we can and can't do.
I think you bring up an interesting question. Again, glad that both of you have different perspectives on this. How do you educate them? How do you educate the owners? Because you are right, they are dictating a lot of things, whether it's time, schedule, cost, material, like means and methods in a way. And these things that you guys deal with, work with, are in the trenches with, like, how do you help elevate that to that level to eventually say, like, hey, because it may not be helpful, it may not be as helpful for them as it is for you, but it is like vitally important to use. Like, what education ways outside of, let's just call it the interview process, because that's probably the most of like, hey, here's what we do, here's what you're going to get with using us as a contractor. Like, what ways do you educate owners of those challenges or technology to help in that?
I'll let Jeff answer that more so than me, but my take on it a little bit is, in this industry that we're in, it's very cutthroat, right? Everyone wants to get a job, so if they got to drop their price and cut things out of it, I mean, if you're an owner or one of our clients and you're looking at an $80 million price tag or a $72 million price tag, it's probably a no-brainer if you're a developer or something, right? So it makes it hard to then kind of sell them on, hey, we need this technology in a job, and they're like, well, this guy down the road, he can do it and he doesn't need all that technology. So then how do you argue that?
Oh boy, that's for Jeff to answer.
Sorry, Jeff.
So I think this is interesting. So within the National AIA AGC Joint Committee, we're having the same discussion. And it really, one of the key things that we're looking at would be partnering and collaboration with the owner and the designer and the contractor. And if that's done right, every time that we've had good, solid partnering, we've had a very, very successful project. And a lot of times what will come out of that partnering is, well, of course we need this. No, we'll write you a change order, or we'll give you this, or there'll be some give and take, some creativity, and it's always been successful.
And you're saying the partners with the architect and the
owner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All parties. My last job was a partnering job like that as well.
Yeah, and really, so Grant, one of the key things, not just the partnering aspect, or you can call it the project expectations. What are your expectations? What can we expect from you? How will you operate? But I think it gets back to that and putting together a charter. This is what we're going to do in this situation. I will do this, or I believe, and how you deal with that. But time and time again, and it gets back to kind of the last podcast I did with you, and when I was trained back in 1990 on how to go ahead and facilitate partnering, those projects are successful.
Mm-hmm. Here's the hot take, though. You ready for this? I think Adam and I maybe see it more so being on the tech side now, a vision from other software technology companies that are like, cool, let's go after the owners. If they're the ones dictating everything, let's get them bought in. We'll make them aware. We'll educate them. They're the ones that are forcing, calling you guys to use certain tools. Is that a good thing, or is that a challenging thing from your guys' perspective? Because it's tricky. You guys get a set of requirements, a spec or Division I spec that says this, and this, and you're like, I've never even used half of these things. Where did these come from? Like, is that a good thing for you guys to have an owner that has said, like, I've done my due diligence, I've been sold this, you should go do it, and then now it's tossed to your hand, and you're like, where did this come from?
I don't know. I think I'd rather see, like, you guys partner with us and then go to the owner and say, this is what we got, and then you guys could talk at a better level than we could, and sell the product to the owner and tell them the benefits of it, rather than go directly to owners, because then again it's just open up to everybody.
Yep.
Like lowest price, but you're going to use this tool and this tool.
I see it many times with project management tools, and there's like 3, 4, 5 that are out there that owners may gravitate to, and you know, we think it's Procore, they think it's something else. It makes it tough to understand new languages. But if it's a longer project, you have that opportunity. If it's a short fuse, it's difficult.
But let's shrink into one of those categories though, like documentation. Pretty typical. An owner wants to know what's behind walls when their job is done, and they'll go hire a service, and then that service then has to coordinate with you guys and when to come out to the job. So now you're managing another contractor on behalf of the owner, and now it's democratized documentation. You can go walk a job with a 360 camera. You can go fly a drone anytime you want. Like, talk about that change a little bit too, because that's what's tricky in a sense, that if an owner is requiring one of those services to be done, you don't necessarily get the value as the contractor, but now you're still coordinating them to come out. Whereas on the opposite end, you could be the one doing the documentation, and it's helpful for you because you're pulling that up in your stand-up meetings and you're pulling that up in your owners' meetings. Does that make sense? Like, documentation's kind of taken this two different, it feels like, our perspective, that it's like taking two different approaches. One, it's like owner-led, just go out and do it as another contractor, versus like you guys on a job democratizing that documentation. You're walking the job anyway. You're getting the value of using it as a coordination tool for your side. Does that make sense?
Somewhat. So as long as the owner-led benefits the entire team, architects and subcontractors and contractors, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, okay? Mm-hmm. As long as everyone gets to, you know, you brought it up, you got a subcontractor meeting and you want to pull up an exact detail. That if you have that ready at your hands-on, it might be better just to use the owner-led piece instead of being in charge of a 360 and going, okay, well, today's Thursday. Grant, it's your turn to walk around the job. Oh, Friday, Adam, it's your turn to walk. Sometimes things drop through the cracks and you don't get what you want. Mm-hmm. So owner-led's not necessarily a bad thing.
I know you've coordinated some owner-led stuff, though, and I'm not saying one is better than another. I think what I'm referring to is how documentation of jobs have changed in the last, call it 10 years, where it used to be that was the only way you would do it. You'd hire someone to come out and do your job, to now like, hey, you got two tools under a couple $1,000 to go do it yourself. And it has appeared that the level of engagement and desire to document jobs has like significantly increased over the last 5 years because of those tools being available for folks like you and using them more in meetings that you would have. Like, would you agree with that, or is that a like, nah, I don't think...
No, I agree. And I think the owner-led ones, from a field standpoint, if we're having to coordinate it, it's just the fewer people that touch something, the easier it is to coordinate and get a job done quicker. And I think with Procore, I mean, that's a one-stop shop in my mind as far as documentation. So, and I really feel like that's a pretty easy sell to owners, even if they were pretty stuck on a certain application that they wanted to use. I think if you went in and showed them, and Grant, you know this, like we use Procore pretty good, and we were pretty innovative with how we used it. I think we could easily sell them on how we're going to document and show them the benefits of it. And, but yeah, owner-led, I'm not a big fan of that.
So if we
the hot takes, come on.
Yeah, if we shift gears just a little bit and kind of take the project, fast forward it to, you know, a successful completion, or maybe a rocky finish. You know, that I think we've all had those in on both ends of the spectrum. What processes, maybe one here at Beck, that you guys have implemented over the course of the last number of years, or maybe anywhere else you might have worked, or any other piece you've seen? What is the process for kind of collecting the lessons learned, collecting, you know, primarily at the field level? What did we do really well? What did we suck at? right? What do I want to take with me to the next one? Like, is there a formal process for that? Is it just kind of each individual learns from their?
I don't know from a company level that we have anything, but I know on the project teams that I've been on, so like the current one I'm on right now, we have like an Excel spreadsheet where everyone's just dumping a whole bunch of lessons learned in it.
Through the course of the job.
Through the course of the job and updating it. I like to keep my own list like on a OneNote as we go through, but I do like to review with the team if we can sit down for a couple hours, and even if that has to be a couple times between phases maybe, or between jobs, to kind of review what went well and what didn't go well, how we could improve. Maybe what our trade partners did well and didn't do well, and how we could help them, support them. I'm pretty big on that.
Yeah.
What's your take on that, Jeff?
Two things. One, I'm getting back to the partnering and the expectations. That at the end, if you have an after-action review, what is it that we set out to do? What happened? Why did it happen? And what are we going to do to make sure it never happens again, or always happens again? One of those two, right? Mm-hmm. I think that can be really successful. I think most companies are really good at collecting lessons learned. Where most of us fail is with how do you share that? And how do you have that available so that when your fellow superintendent is in the midst of something similar, that he has that information at his fingertips? That's, to me, the holy grail. I don't think it happens.
You bring up a really good point that I hadn't quite formulated in my head necessarily, is that I think at the company level, there's usually a very good understanding and awareness of what's going well and what isn't, especially when there's a financial, either benefit or, something falls through the cracks. I think at the company level, you're absolutely right. I think most organizations have a really good understanding of what's going well and what isn't. Where, again, coming from the field and staying on the focus of the field here, is something that frustrated me, is that when I went from one job to the next, I was like, why are we doing this again? Like, we just did it over there, and I'm now being presented with this same issue. All right, well, now we got to figure it out. We go to job 3. What the hell's going on around here? Is anybody listening? And, there's a number of variables and factors that go into those things, right? It could be design incomplete. It could be you just got a bad sub on a job. It could be, X, Y, and Z. I think there should be, and it is, I don't even know if this is a question, actually. It's just me on a soapbox. There should be more of a focus on the industry, disseminating those lessons learned in a lot of those cases. And, I mean, maybe it's just a do you agree or not kind of thing at this point.
No, I think you're right. There's a lot of factors that go into it though too, right? So like if you change, like if I go to phase 2, half of my team could change, and so they could bring their habits to the job and not be part of the lessons learned. We could do a better job with integrating that team into the team that was originally there to review the lessons learned, to get them up to speed of what worked and what didn't. And then different projects, right? Every project's different. Mm-hmm. So whether you're going from a renovation at a school, or whether you're doing a high-rise, or whether you're doing a museum or something like that, like, and you said it too, like trade partners could be different, right? Mm-hmm. You could have some that are really not good, and you could have some that are really sharp, and that varies from job to job. So that changes your lessons learned too a little bit. You're like, I'm never going to have that happen to me again with a sub like that, and then, your subs on your next job are really good, and you kind of forget that they were really bad. Yeah. And then that comes around on your third project down the line or something. You're like, man, and you think back halfway through, like, I should have probably reviewed my lessons learned from.
Should have wrote that down.
2001.
Maybe something at that like operational technology level though. Like going back to talking about kind of who owns that. Someone has to own it, right? No one owns it, probably doesn't gonna happen. And it's interesting. We talk about like the benefits of that team and the fact that they do see across a lot of projects, a lot of things are going on across the company. But yeah, that lessons learned. That to me feels as much of a hot topic as ROI, because it's like it's this elusive rabbit in the night that you can't catch, and that it's there, and it's I don't know, it's tricky.
Well, one other thing too, and going back to something that I think maybe before we started recording, you threw out the word tact and the method of planning that I would assume we didn't talk about it very much. You're implementing that as a planning method on your projects. That is something that you've adopted and kind of are carrying through your work, and then maybe a little more discussion on that.
I'm trying to. Again, Jordan Christensen and Justin Truckenmiller, we kind of introduced that at our TCU, and we used that through the housing projects there, and I try to use it through the school. I don't have it on this project, but I'd like to pick it back up. I think that gives a real clear picture to the trade partners of where they need to go, what they need to get done, and how long they have to get it done. So I think it sets real clear expectations, and then from a superintendent or field or our team on the job site, we have a real clear picture in front of us too. And again, it's you can have your meetings, you can pull up the tack time on the screen and you can talk to it real easy, and subs should be able to follow that because they're just looking at a colored box, and if they're the blue box, that's all they got to kind of worry about, getting their work done. Whereas if you're showing them a P6 schedule or something like that, they have no clue how to read it.
Right.
They don't even know.
Shoot, we don't know how to read it. We put it together.
Yeah, I don't either.
But the reason I bring it up and ask about it, my last project, the superintendent on that job brought with him the TAC planning method, and it really changed my view on traditional scheduling, right? I mean, having only worked with kind of CPM P6 schedules prior to that, then being introduced to TAC planning was the only job I ever worked on where I told subs to slow down, right? You know, going too fast is just as bad as not going fast enough, right? If you're overproducing, you know, then you're not, it's not benefiting the project. So just want to throw that out there. I feel like we, with a lot of what the industry is talking about with lean, and kind of, you know, you said every building's different, right? Lean in its essence is originates from the manufacturing process. It's like a lot of things. What people don't understand is construction is different than manufacturing. We're building something different every time, whereas manufacturing is geared to mass produce the same thing over and over again. And so, trying to adopt those principles is generally tough. And TACT is kind of in that adjacent lane that I think has been successful. So it's cool to hear you guys are doing it.
Yeah, it is hard to get people to understand to slow down, but you know, the big thing with TACT is just trust the plan that you have in place.
Yep.
While I land the plane, fellas, thank you for giving us so much of your time, and always a technical challenge, I'm sure, swapping batteries and getting cameras working. But Jeff saving the day here for the second half. But yeah, I appreciate you guys making the time. I think my takeaways is I'm thinking of like who listens to these and what kind of the resounding lesson learned should be just like, get out in the field, go talk. I mean, you obviously have done that so many times and formalized it in a lot of ways when you were on the Beck team, and you know, Paul's saying, hey, like that is what I think helps these things come from ideas to challenges to implements to successes, and I think that's what just get out there, shake some hands, sit in some job sites trailers and talk to some folks that hear what they're doing. So any last thoughts? Anything?
We're not that prickly out in the field, so come and see us.
We're not that prickly. Jeff, is that true?
He's awesome. I just want to end with what I started with. Give the superintendent what he wants when he wants it. If we do that, this will be a successful project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said. Well, team, thank you guys for making the time. It's fun. I love the clouds have cleared a little bit now as we put that as your guys' backdrop, one, because it looks really good behind you, but two, it's fun to look back on. I have one more credit in me, Jeff, your 40-year career, and see, just all that. I think what's cool is the projects, right? But you guys both know it's the people, and those are the things that you probably remember the most of the teams you built, the folks that you've gotten to spend many hours with on jobs, and the buildings are just a representation of that. But it's cool. It's fun to sit up here and talk through that. So appreciate your guys' time. Adam, any last thoughts you want to share?
No, this has been awesome. There's another conversation that I'm thoroughly enjoying.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We hope you guys are encouraged. Take some good notes. Get out to the field. Go talk to your superintendents, and we appreciate you guys listening. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Make sure to subscribe to Built Different on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Let's build this community together.